Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Somatic Hound Podcast. And today I'm really excited to talk to Karishma of Calm Canine Academy.
Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure I said that right, especially because we just met on Sunday for the first time over Zoom, and we had really just briefly connected on Instagram. I was very intrigued by your philosophy and approach to dogs, and specifically there was a post about fetch that we kind of connected on, and today we want to talk about biological fulfillment for your dog. And so I'll let you, Karishma, introduce yourself and your business.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been amazing to see your work and see so much of the things that we've developed at Calm Canine Academy reflected in your work as well in different parts of the world. Never met each other before, so it's always lovely when that happens. And yeah, excited to chat today. So my name is Karishma. I am head of training at Calm Canine Academy, which is a group of dog trainers who work like virtually 100% virtually, specializing in like complex cases of separation anxiety, reactivity, aggression, and like other often fear-based behavior concerns. And we really enjoy using the most modern, up-to-date, the most eclectically informed kind of techniques and bringing it all together, kind of like you do, Leah, with this idea of like somatic therapy for dogs, which is something I haven't seen that much in the kind of training landscape. So super excited to like bridge that gap between what we do and what you do today and chat about it.
Yeah, so we kind of briefly talked on Sunday how we both really believe that nervous system regulation is kind of the foundation of our training, and this like bottom-up approach, much like somatic experiencing for humans, focuses on bodily sensations and what state the nervous system is in, and then moving through those different states from like freeze to fight or flight, and then finally back to social engagement. So the reason we connected, I think specifically I was, that fetch post piqued my interest is because I feel like fetch can be very dysregulating to certain dogs. And I've had that personal experience with my little pit bull, Eva, and I've found other activities to be kind of more regulating and more satisfying in a way that really fulfills the dog's biological need for exercise, the predatory sequence. And so if you want to get into some of the things you suggest as fetch alternatives.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's riff a little bit. So if you haven't seen this post, it got a lot of traction online, I think, because we think of fetch as this thing that all dogs love, right? And I'm sure that you yourself said that you had this experience with your dog. I had this experience with my first dog, Hera, who's a poodle, and a very fearful poodle at that. So we'll talk about how that plays into it in a moment. But I thought, we need to offer predatory substitutes for our dogs, and play, chasing, retrieving. This is what dogs do, right? And so it can be really weird for me to now turn up and us to turn up and say, actually, maybe fetch isn't that fulfilling. And I love the words you used, fulfilling, and like satisfying was another one. Because the predatory sequence for most dogs is very fulfilling and satisfying in its entirety. And so for those who don't know much about predatory behaviors in dogs, it starts off usually with like tracking the prey, and then they chase and bite, and maybe then rip it up and eat it, or carry it around, or do something with that prey after at the end. Fetch is kind of like the first half of the predatory sequence, but without the ending. So it's like listening to a song, but it stops halfway through. Really frustrating, not fulfilling, not satisfying. Yes, it is exciting, arousing in the way that the body is becoming activated, heart is beating, eyes are wide. But I wouldn't say that that's happiness. I wouldn't say that's fulfillment, and I wouldn't say that that's satisfaction. And so fetch, back to this dysregulation piece, is kind of like the first half without the ending. And you can imagine that doing a behavior over and over again without a satisfying conclusion can be addicting because you're constantly trying to get to that end point. that satisfying conclusion, exhausting as well. And I think lots of people benefit from an exhausted dog afterwards. You know, they're like, that's great, I love that. But I think maybe just hearing about that predatory sequence and how it should be really finished, and how fetch is this just beginning part over and over again, that sort of helped me really understand why it might not be so helpful for the dogs. And we see it come out in their behavior. So I want to talk more about our dogs. Like, I think that's really interesting, because like my dog Hera, when he would fetch repetitively, he hurt himself physically doing it, injured himself many times, and he would fetch and then he'd start limping immediately afterwards. Let's maybe start off. Can we talk about some of the like health stuff that we saw? Did you see any like physical stuff with your own pups or in your clients' pups? I'm just interested in like chatting about that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So the lameness, it's actually like all those quick movements and then stopping and turning and just doing that over and over and over again. I do think it creates repetitive movement injuries.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Especially, we have this one ball that we called the crack ball. Sorry, not very couth, but we called it the crack ball. It was especially small and especially bouncy. And so it would bounce and then go really quickly in fast, unpredictable directions. And fetch often involves a lot of like from stop to start, flat out running, quick turns on their joints. And often this happens with no warm up. And it's not normal for dogs to be motivated to push themselves to that extreme. However, when we mess, well, it's not normal for animals necessarily, but when we mess with genetics and we create retrieving poodles, hunting dogs bred to be very interested in bringing back those game birds, or if we have pitties or muscly dogs, like we have another dog in our house who's a muscly dog, bred to very, very interested by that fast moving stimulus, really want that bite. That's very reinforcing for them. It can get to a very dangerous level. And so I've seen dogs break limbs and keep running. I've seen dogs, I know a dog who broke their spine and didn't stop playing fetch. And whenever I posted about this on Instagram, because the post went really big and lots of people saw it, probably got about 15 to 20 messages, people being like, I don't really want to talk about this, but I had a dog who died of water intoxication after playing fetch for an hour in the sun, or I have a dog who died of heat stroke because they weren't able to regulate themselves enough to stop, and they etc., or you know, just very big injuries. The health risks are bigger than we think, I think, for a game like this. And I think that when it comes to nervous system regulation, that in and of itself is going to dysregulate a nervous system. Pain is going to make a nervous system dysregulated, and that's going to lead to behavior problems. And I don't know about you, but I saw and still see a lot of behavior problems that are coupled with repetitive high impact fetch. Some of them reactivity, hyperactivity, difficulty settling, repetitive kind of connection seeking behaviors. So trying to play again and again. And my poodle, once I counted, asked me to play over 100 times in a 12-hour cycle. That's exhausting. Like, what an exhausting life he must have been living at that time, just trying so hard. So we often see a correlation between how a dog can turn up on a day-to-day basis and regulate themselves around triggers and the kind of activities that we're putting in. So do you maybe recommend, you said like some alternatives to fetch, we talked about that before. And so just for anyone who doesn't know, one of the first things that we often do, and Leah, it sounds like you as well, is we'll go in and look at the activity schedules. And if we're seeing lots of repetitive fetch, we might just say, okay, let's just start with changing that. We're not even going to get you doing training around dogs yet. You're not even going to be out with your clicker and your cookies. We're going to just change the schedule. And fetch is one of the first things that I'll start to twiddle with. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. And it's really hard, because I think as much as the dog is addicted to that stimulation and they look excited to see the ball, the owner is almost like addicted also to this feeling that, like many people like myself included, I thought I was fulfilling the dog by playing. So then it's almost like heartbreaking, because the owner's like, what do you mean? Like, I thought this was good for the dog. And then they sometimes feel guilt, or shame, or like sometimes it brings up really deep feelings, because I'm saying this thing that you thought was good might actually be harming your dog. But once we move through that, it's often so quickly that the dog changes. Like even within 2 weeks, they'll say, oh, the leash reactivity is reduced drastically.
100% agree with that. It's one of the areas that you can just see really amazing quick results, because some people are playing so much that it's making such a big impact. And I just want to like so resonate with that guilt and that feeling, because my dog now has hip issues and arthritis, and he's 6 years old. And I know that what I did in his early years contributed to that. I also know that there are many other things that contributed to that. So of course I have the mom guilt, and we all have the mom guilt. But I really think about like my journey in healing my nervous system and healing here in my poodle's nervous system. They kind of come hand in hand, because at that time I also lived in New York City, in Manhattan. I was working in person. I was very chronically stressed, just like him. And it's hard to blame yourself for things that you did before you knew, right? So all you can do is look back on I look back on the past versions of us, and I go like, oh, it's so hard that you didn't have this information that I have now. And then I like thank my present self. Thank you for finding this information. Now I have it, and we can move forwards. And like you said, the reinforcement loop changes very quickly from fetch being the reinforcing thing to this actually the thing that we replace fetch with. And maybe we can talk more about that, because the biological fulfillment piece, if you think you're having fun with fetch, just you wait. Just you wait until we give you these new games. You're going to lose it, because it's going to be 10 times better. And that really helps me, is going like, it's not that you weren't meeting their needs. It's not that you were like really screwing up. That's not what happened. You were doing a great job, and we can just make it even better. That's kind of the attitude that I take with this. So, okay, so let's talk about fetch alternatives to start off with, and then, or maybe, yeah, let's do that. And then I like to also offer like fetch alterations, or like you can still play fetch, but maybe some alterations. So we talked a lot about like, okay, if they're not chasing and retrieving, maybe they can be tugging or something like that. So I love tuggy play as like your primary form of play, as over something like tossing a toy over and over again. So tugging or wrestling, so like getting on the floor and go with your dog, are my kind of really favorite ways. That can be physically draining and challenging for sure, more so than a fetch game, but often less of that is more fulfilling for the dog. So you could do 10 minutes of tug, and the dog will be as like probably more fulfilled than they would have done if they'd had 30 minutes of fetch or something like that. So that's often helped me feel better about it. I'm like, okay, quality over quantity. A little bit of really good play like that will likely be really beneficial. I know that you talk a lot about tugging, and you have muscly dogs, so do you agree with like the tuggy stuff?
Oh yeah, I totally cut out fetch with my pit bull, and we went just to tug work. And I think we had talked a little bit about like, now she's almost 16. She's a little frail to be doing these types of activities, but I would hide the tug in the car. Like we don't play tug in the house. Some people do, which is fine. I just always have too many dogs to have like toys out, and like resource guarding dogs. And so like her special tug toy was always in the car. So we would start the walk with that like searching behavior. She would find the toy. The reward for finding the toy is the tug play, like actually playing a tug game, and then always letting her win, letting her carry the toy on the walk. So then it becomes like her carrying her prey, and they kind of like, I don't like to say they feel proud, but
well, for muscly dogs, the kind of patrol with the thing they won, it's like a celebration, I think, for them.
Yes.
How they celebrate, they go like that. We do the same thing with Ash. We all clap when he does it. He runs around the garden holding his toy, and we go, very good, you won, excellent. Hurrah, hurrah, show us. I totally agree. You're letting her savor it, you're like, savor that win, show everyone in the neighborhood how strong you are.
Yeah, and the trainer that I apprenticed with, he used to work with protection dogs. And so if you watch videos where like the protection dog is on a sleeve, and then they slip the sleeve and they kind of lunge the dog around and they're carrying it. So he calls that the bite and carry. So we do that with our pet dogs. They're not biting sleeves, and we're not training them for protection, but it's the same celebration of like, oh, you caught the prey, like you were successful, and it builds so much confidence. So I think
it finishes the sequence. There's an end.
Yes.
That's what we love about tug, or even I do the same thing with fetch, I guess. maybe even play like 2 or 3 throws of a toy that I was tugging with, and then we finish the game and they get to carry it around and maybe chew on the toy a little bit. But you have to think about the arc of the predation sequence. If you're psyching them up with that chasing, like tracking, chasing side, how are we bringing them down? And so with your pity, you're saying you get to tug on it, wrestle with it, maybe then chew on it, patrol it around. We're kind of ending the story. And that's where the fulfillment comes in. The fulfillment, I feel like, comes in at the end of the sequence. And you can almost see their bodies soften when they get to kind of finish the sequence. They go like, oh, okay, that was pretty good. Ooh. And you can see them kind of like soften into that. And then you can just do it again, and maybe like 3 or 4 times, or however long is appropriate for your dog. So yeah, tugging, love tugging. And I don't mind a little bit of throwing. So I think this is actually really important to say. Like, it's not like we're like, never throw a toy ever. Like, I throw toys every day, every single day, but I throw toys. And if I'm going to get my dogs to run quickly and chase something on good surfaces that aren't too hard or too slippery, I throw toys not like crazy far. Like, they don't need to be in a big chucket like 50 feet away. It could just go a few feet to the left or the right. That's totally fine. And I'll do it 3 or 4 times, not 20 times. And that's it. So it's just about that balance, I think. You agree a little bit of throwing is totally fine? I think the flooring is quite important to me. I'm not gonna lie. I get really, it like makes me feel like I feel the pain for them when they're running on slippery floors. I'm like, eek, ouch, that looks stressful.
Yeah, I actually only do that type of work outdoors. But totally, like, if you have a dog that doesn't have huge toy drive, like, okay, my bully breed dogs just naturally want to bite the tug toy.
A little
so if you have
this guy, not so into it, are you? No, you just like, yeah.
So for that type of dog, yes, I 100% would throw it and create some of that excitement around the toy. So dogs have different levels of drive, so you always have to make modifications for your specific dog. Even like, you might have a pit bull that just doesn't have huge toy drive. Then yeah, maybe you play a little keep away, or you attach it to a rope and drag it on the ground and make it more playful for them. And then one other thing I was just going to say is, like, I've actually had both my female pits will carry their toy all the way back to the house and into their crate. So it's really like they're taking the prey back to their den. And then if it's like dinner time, if you've timed it all right and they're hungry, then you can like put a bowl of food in their crate, and they actually like 100% complete that sequence of like chasing, biting, killing, carrying, and ingesting.
Obsessed. I think I love like the different ways you can do that for the different breeds as well. So for Hero, my poodle, I do a lot of, he's stalking. I often like will like move toys, and he has like a behavior where he just watches them and he gets almost like hypnotized. And then he might do a bit of chasing, and then I often will release from inside the toy a little bit of paper with a treat inside, and then he has to rip the paper up, dissect, pull it apart, consume the food. And it's amazing because if I offer him that, he almost always settles immediately afterwards. If I don't offer him that ending, he'll come back again and again, because we've only done the first. He's like, finish it. Finish it. Why are we not finishing it? Honey, sorry. So yeah, I love that. Like, how can you then, the eating behavior comes at the end of the predatory sequence, right? So the predatory sequence is one of the most like emotion or like physically arousing sequences. That reproductive sequence would be another one, right? Things that are really fundamental to survival. So when that is activated, the body, and I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but I do know that the body gets flooded with hormones associated with alertness, readiness, and you can see that in the dog's bodies, their eyes, their ears, their musculature. Sometimes they even like will get erections or red ears or red tongues as the blood pumps. How do we drain that at the end? We just lit them up. How do we have to bring them back down again at the end? And it's eating, it's dissecting, maybe even sniffing and eating would be really useful. So at its bare minimum, if you just play a few throws of fetch, scatter a bunch of food on the floor and repeat that, even that could be a little bit better than the repetitive over and over again. So it's whether you want to go full, kind of orchestrate the full predatory sequence like we do, like, and dog nerves, or you just want to throw some like dinner around for them while you're playing with them so that they have that chance to slow and eat. There are different levels to this, but if you understand that you have to finish it,
Yes.
and bring them back down, that in and of itself can be enough. And that's all about the nervous system. When I say bring it back down, we're talking about lower the heart rate,
Yes.
lower the stress in the muscles on the face, the ears return to a neutral position. Literally their heart rate should be going down. And if we had, I've always wanted a collar that has different lights depending on like arousal response, or some sort of, we could think about it like temperature and respiration rate, or temperature, heart rate and respiration rate or something. And then it would be red if the dog's like really feeling really intensely inside, and green if they're feeling at their baseline. I want that so bad. And I imagine it on my dog all the time. And I don't know if that really helps me because I'm very visual. But yeah,
I think maybe we should get somebody to develop that for us.
That's a very smart person. Hey, if any of you listening are a very smart person, please come to us and we can make this thing.
Wow, that's amazing. That would be so helpful to have this like a biofeedback tool on the dog.
It would be a nervous system regulation translator, basically, so that the humans could really quickly pick up on the patterns, because some people just misread arousal that would be red on that imaginary color that we're creating as excitement. And I think it would be useful for us to be able to say that level of arousal is likely never helpful for that dog. Like getting them up to that level might not be helpful, especially if you don't have the skills to bring them back down. So managing the nervous system is honestly more important to me than managing behavior. It's like a whole nother, I've added it to my behavior checklist when I'm doing training plans. It's not just about managing the behavior to make sure that the dog isn't lunging and barking or stealing things off the counter. It's also about managing the nervous system so that their heart rate stays at a healthy, steady level and doesn't spike randomly throughout the day, and that their, glands aren't randomly excreting high levels of cortisol out of nowhere. Those are the things that are really important. And it's part of that bottom-up approach. We're looking from the body up into the brain rather than from the brain down into the body. And I don't know about you, but I did like top down, so brain-based therapy or cognitive-based therapies on for myself for mental health for many, many years. And it actually made me worse because my issue was not to do with how I was conceiving of information or processing things. It was about my ability to control my body. And as an autistic person and as a someone with ADHD, that's also going to be, and disability, physical disability, that's going to be harder for me, right? So this bottom-up approach, which is now, that's why I loved seeing this language that you were using on your website. I was like, oh yeah, this is what we say all the time, but we just haven't used the exact language that we use when talking about humans, which is this kind of language about nervous system regulation, bottom up, somatics, etc. So useful. I love it. It's such
I had the same experience with like the talk therapy actually making me more anxious. Or like I just tried to like do a lot of self-work by like sitting and meditating, and that made things much worse. And then I found I've been to a few different therapists. Most of them have been trained in somatic experiencing. At least 2 of them did actual body work, like table work.
Amazing.
And so like biodynamic craniosacral or just hands-on healing work. So if you can co-regulate with your therapist, if they're really skilled at that, that's actually for me was the best therapy. So I think we can think about that also with our dogs. And it's kind of making me wonder also, like, why do people get that excitement and arousal and overstimulation confused with like the dog being happy?
Oh, this is my thesis. I thought a lot about this because it was the same for me, and it wasn't just for the dogs. I mistook my excitement and nervous system activation as happiness as well, And for me, as a human, let's not talk about dogs for a second, but as a human, it came down to being socialized where my nervous system was in a state of constant panic to a certain degree, or that was a normal state for my body to be in to keep it safe when I was younger. And so as I got older, it was just normal for me. And I didn't know how to recognize those signs on myself. And I think the same thing happens with a lot of our dogs. We get these dogs, we're often in quite intense environments, maybe urban environments, or maybe they're just quite intense dogs, like for example a certain breed, or a dog that's had some trauma or something like that. We get desensitized almost to their own body language, and that's what it is. It's being desensitized to reading their body language. I saw it happen with my own dog Hera. He's a poodle, and I would play fetch with him all the time in parks in Brooklyn when we lived in New York. And one day I shaved his face down for the first time. I shaved his face all the way down to the bottom. And then I was like, what the? Sorry, I don't know if I'm meant to swear on this, but okay. I was like, oh my God, because I'd become so used to seeing his face with the hair on that when it was gone, it was like seeing a new dog, and I could see how stressed he was, and I thought he was having fun. So it was almost like I got to like see him with a slightly different perspective for a moment, and then I realized I'd become desensitized to how he looked. I thought that was just how he looked. I was like, oh, he was just like that. But then I think about it, and I think back to my childhood, and if I had like a meltdown as a kid, my parents would often go, oh, Karishma's just like that. That's what Karishma's like. But Karishma's not like that, actually. I have to say, as an adult who's been regulating my nervous system for a long time, I don't have meltdowns. It was the fact that my nervous system wasn't being taken care of back then that led to that. And then that can just become how we perceive that animal. I don't know if you agree with or have seen that arc yourself, but it's a common one that I see a lot, whether it's due to people becoming just desensitized or just never knowing how to read dog body language in the first place. That's also a thing. Yeah, those are definitely some of the trends that I see though.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, like, and I think back the same way you did, like your dog was kind of mirroring your own state. And so like, it's always a system, like what is going on with the owner? Well, I was also in need of getting sober at that time, that I was like thinking, oh, this is fun for my dog, and seeing the quote unquote excitement and just thinking like, that's just who she is. She's a high strung pit bull. Like that's the breed and that's her. And she honestly transformed into a totally different dog as I went through my own transformation, and it kind of happened in parallel. And then she ended up being like the happiest, sweetest, like, and this was a dog who fought at least 3 of my other dogs at different times. And her reactivity was just like off the charts. She had no impulse control. And I mean, I did get her when she was 3, and she came with a lot of that baggage, but like I had no idea how to help her with that. And I just thought, well, I'll just get her tired by playing fetch, and look, she loves it. But she was doing that obsessive thing where like then when we would have the ball in the house, she would like constantly push it under the couch and then ask me to get the ball, and then I was going mental.
Here did the exact same thing.
And then we were like dysregulating instead of
yes, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. And I felt so bad saying no to him, and I would be constantly like, why are you like this? It's so annoying. And then just have to tell myself, this is just what it's like, this is just what it's like, and trying to force myself to extend empathy, because I was enough in my healing journey that I knew that I shouldn't be mad at him. It's not his fault, but that's incredibly challenging, and from now I know not how it should feel. And I love that you say about this transformation that your pup had, because Hera has had a very similar transformation. When he was younger, he was just the fastest, most like flammable little dog. Like he'd go from 0 to 100. He would be triggered by everything, constantly barking, the poodle bark, that very high pitched bark, constantly moving. He was skinny, and I couldn't put muscle on him or any fat on him because he was so overactive, hyper muscled even in certain areas, because he was just repeating these behaviors. He looked kind of wild, like a gym bro who'd been kind of like pumped up or something. And now, I mean, he's gotten softer, to be perfectly honest. He probably could get in better shape, but he's happier, he's calm, his face has relaxed. His eyes used to be like kind of weird. He always looked stressed in every picture, and now he's like this. He's like, hey, what's up? And he's slower, he moves slower, but not because he's uncomfortable, just because he doesn't feel this consistent like propelling forwards that his nervous system seemed to have. That's what it seemed to feel. It looked like that anyway. And I'm always thinking not about his behavior, but just about how his muscles look. Do you look relaxed? What's your breathing like? Like, that's the stuff that I'm really looking at for him to keep him like that. Because I know the behavior falls into place once that has come, when you got that nervous system approach. And for Hera, that looked like, similarly to your dog, aggression, issues with aggressive behavior going away very, very, in ways that I never thought possible. I thought my goal with Hera, because Hera has a lot of stranger fear, a lot of fear of dogs, my goal was like coexist with neutrality. That was my end goal. Never did I think that he'd have 20 friends, human friends now, and he is social. I have to tell him to stop going up to people. I'm like, no, come back. And he's like, well, they look nice. I'm like, who are you? Like, the change we can see is just phenomenal. And it's all because of this bottom-up approach, because I tried the top down and it made him worse. So it's just like me. It was not helpful.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So another thing, like what we're talking about with impulse control and the reactivity, I always tell people like the quality of the movement is really important. So if you think about fetch being really fast and jerky movements, like that's also like emotionally what's going on with the dog. Their emotions are really fast and jerky. So another thing that I tell people is a great alternative, if they're willing to do it, is canine resistance training, which is that heavy work that we were talking about, where they wear a custom harness. So you do have to invest in a harness, and then they drag weight. So when I'm walking my dogs, instead of trying to tire them out with like 5 or 6 miles, we can do like 1 or 2 miles, but they're dragging chains. It looks a little weird. Like, not many people are familiar with it, but
there are gym bros at my gym who drag chains.
okay.
But I do know what you mean, insofar as like, so heavy work is what I often use to describe like work that involves, like you said, resistance of some sort, or especially like you're saying, slow movements with things. So there's a lot of dragging and pushing, essentially. For some dogs, especially breeds specifically, this can be really helpful. So we both have muscly dogs. We do a lot of like tug work on spring poles with him, which is also heavy work, but it's core and neck heavy work. And so 100% agree that this can be so helpful, because we don't want to not light them up. When I say about lighting up that arousal system, it's not that we don't want to let them get up. And this is what a lot of folks kind of criticize about sometimes about this approach is they'll say, like, you know, these dogs are meant to be intense. You have to let them be intense. Totally agree. I totally agree you should let them be intense. And whether it's you're teaching them retrieving games if they're a retriever, or scent work, or heavy work if they need to use their muscles, activating these sensory systems, the scent system, the system for like, you know, seeking with their eyes, or literally introspecting with their muscle into their musculature. This is what regulates the nervous system. It brings it down from chaotic, unpredictable to mindful, slow movement. Other things we do is heavy work as well, but it all kind of falls within, for me, this like body work category. So things like cavaletti poles, love cavaletti poles, which are essentially, like, if anyone doesn't know them, they're just like tiny little like mini horse jumps, I guess. And they're spaced about 1 dog's stride width apart, and so the dogs have to really pick up their feet when they're going over them like a little show pony, and so it can teach this, like, they rehearse this, essentially this very well postured stride like a little dressage horse, and it can be really useful. We do it with this little Shih Tzu. All the dogs, from the 90-pound dog we have in our house down to the 9-pound dog, do these cavaletti poles to teach them to get like really good raise and lift in their legs, rather than dragging their limbs if they have any weakness. So whatever your adjustment is, for me, whether it's adding weights, whether it's making them sniff, whether it's making them walk on things or over things, the goal is introspection. The goal is slow, mindful movement. And there are some dogs who you'll look at and go like, lol, as if. So my Staffy Ash, slow, mindful movement, lol, that's like the funniest thing I've ever heard. He literally is a bull in a china shop. And we've spent the first year and a half teaching him to walk really slowly and think about where his body goes. And you talked about balance beams that you had at your house. Similar, right? It's the same thing. It's just about getting them to think about where their body is. Like, can you tell everyone about the balance beams though? Because I think that's really cute.
Yeah, I started out doing this because one of my clients was kind of jokingly said he had 4 dogs. They were all brothers. He had the mother. And so he wanted them to be circus dogs. So I started building all this equipment in my backyard and like teaching them to walk on a balance beam. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do this with my dogs. And I realized it was so good for their proprioception, for slowing them down, giving them a different kind of challenge. And it's also really interesting that you just brought up dressage, because one of our kind of core exercises is actually called collection, which is borrowed from dressage work. So it's exactly what you're talking about. The dog has to learn how to collect themselves over their center of gravity. So instead of always surging forward, they're getting themselves collected. So I totally agree. Also, like, I love to amp my dogs up and do really intense tug work. And I've even worked my dogs on a sleeve. And some people are like a little freaked out by that, but
it's a wearable toy. It's a wearable toy.
Really fun. It's really fun. So as much as you amp them up and let them express that intensity, that satisfies that need that they have for like biting and fighting and conflict. I'm kind of specifically talking about my pit bulls, but also like my boxer mix. But then you have to balance that with the collection work and the proprioception work. So they're not always just surging, biting, lunging. So you're balancing it. Like, we definitely do want them to express the bite and the fight, but we also have to teach them, like, we don't do that 100% of the time.
100%. And it's different for the different breeds that will have different needs. So Ash is similarly muscly. He wants the slam, the bite, the tug, the wrestle. That's the thing that gets him super pumped. And after we do that, I need to then go, okay, that was really fun. We had a really good time. Shall we just eat some cookies and watch TV before we have it? You know, that's essentially it, right? You're not going to come out from like a kid's playground with your toddler and then be like, okay, bedtime. Like, that's, you need to wind them down, and the dogs will need the same thing. But for Hero, the poodle, the biting and the rest and the conflict, he doesn't like that. What he wants to find it. He's like, everyone get the F out of my way. I'm finding it. And I'll find it for you. I will search for hours and I will bring it back to you and I will put it in your hand. Like, that for him gets him so psyched. But we always have to bring him down afterwards. And it's just so interesting how we can use all of these different tools for the different dogs for their different needs. And it's true when people say every dog is different and needs to be trained in a slightly different way or taught in a different way, but it's all under the same framework. It's all this idea of moderating, navigating, managing their nervous system, using the predatory sequence, the first half to pump them up, the second half to bring them down, essentially, or not quite that simply, but essentially like using that to bring it up and then calming that system down. You're teaching them to calm down. You're teaching them, the way that I see it for myself is that you're teaching them an internal cue, which is that when I feel myself get to the point where the collar's going orange and red, I should turn back around and calm myself down. So you're essentially teaching your dogs to do that nervous system U-turn themselves in time. So people often say like, oh, do I have to do this forever? Actually, kind of not forever necessarily. Like, you can reduce how much you need to help them come down over time because that skill is being strengthened. So people are always really confused when they come to me for like reactivity, and I'm like, okay, we're going to play this game where we get them lit up and then we cool them down, and it's going to be really great. And they're like, what? And I'm like, you don't get it. It's the same, it applies. But it's sometimes you have to go around the back to get the behavior change you need, and the nervous system is like the back door, I feel like, almost in the behavior change.
Oh, totally. Yeah, because I think like people want to, like a dog who's barking because they're overstimulated, they want to put a bark collar, and like the bark is just the symptom. And so like if we do this total overhaul of like the house protocol and giving downtime in a crate, or maybe not a crate, it doesn't have to be, but if we provide enough downtime and like you said, we teach that arc, so the dog understands that like they can choose to self-regulate. And I'm not saying they're intellectualizing this, but they kind of learn it as a physical memory. Like after I get aroused, I come back down.
It feels good to regulate yourself. It is innately reinforcing. Of course, they are essentially learning that antecedent behavior consequence. When I feel stressed, if I sniff and walk around, or if I rip up this little piece of paper, I will feel better. The maladaptive pattern that lots of dogs learn is when I feel my nervous system get activated, I then essentially tense up into that feeling, which we've all been there, and I start hyperventilating, running around, jumping, doing things that further push that up. And it's the same for me. Like I did the same thing with myself and my own body. I empathize with it so much. I love starting to see them make those decisions themselves. Like I remember the first few times when Hira, I'd say all done after playing a game, and he would go and sniff around the room for him by himself, just like sniff some smells. Hira would never sniff if there were toys in the room before. He would be hyperventilating, staring at me. And then he just went and lay down. And I was like, God, he did it. He did it. And I didn't necessarily, I'd always thought I'd had to tell him to do it. I'd always be telling him, lay down. Like I tried to use obedience to achieve that, when what I actually needed was for him to learn how to regulate himself, and for me to just step back and let him do it, rather than me try to like control everything that he did. And I think that's another part of these changes that can be stressful, is because you're not in, it feels like you're in a little bit less control, but you're building trust by relinquishing that control to the animal. It's so cool. I love it. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like we do want to help guide them in the beginning, but I feel like, you know, people overemphasize obedience, and sometimes the dog is just obeying out of feeling pressure, and that pressure is just continuing to stress them. So like I do like to show the dog like, yes, you can go to your place and lay down, and like we do it really with you know, food, but also massage is really important. So like if you massage them on their place, then the association is like, oh my gosh, I feel so much oxytocin when I lay on my bed. Like it just creates a nice association. And so like it's not about obedience, it's about teaching the dog to self-regulate because it feels good. And then they choose it themselves, and then you're not constantly micromanaging.
So much of that, and it's actually made me think even more about this topic of co-regulation that you were talking about. So you're managing your dog's nervous systems, you're managing your nervous system. What I tend to find, I don't know if this is the same for you, but often as like animals who live together, we tend to kind of create patterns and cycles that work, and we co-regulate together. So for example, if I generally get quite overstimulated throughout the day. I have to take, like, I call them my crate naps, where I come into my room and I close my curtains and I put my fans on and I just sit for an hour doing whatever it is I do, like my enrichment activities, playing a game, reading, whatever. I do that twice a day, and my dogs come up with me and we do things much like this. We cuddle, I pet them, they pet me, we lay together, maybe they eat or chew something, and it's like them regulating becomes a cue for me to regulate, me regulating becomes a cue to them for them to regulate. And it's got to the point now where sometimes one of us will take a deep breath and you'll hear all the other animals go, because we practice it so much together. And it's so cool to see it becomes like a self-fulfilling kind of like a snowball effect, where you all start to regulate each other and help each other. And I love that. Like similarly, when we're on a walk with my hero, who used to be quite reactive, so sometimes I'll get stressed or something when we see a trigger, or he'll get stressed or something, and like that, and then we'll both do our move away together. I'll toss the cookies for you and take my deep breaths, and then we'll pet each other. Well, I'll have a pet, I'll crouch down, we'll have a little massage, and then we'll keep it going on our walk. And we both dealt with that together. Like we both went through the process together of like completing that stress cycle and then moved on with our lives. And it's very cool to see guardians come from being like, I'm so stressed when I'm walking my dog, to them being like, I know how to finish this cycle, move through it and move on. And often I'm sending guardians to therapists. I'm sending guardians to somatic therapists. And I'm like, I've said many times I should get one on staff at CCA, because sometimes they need that before we can even start with the dogs, because they're so dysregulated, so anxious about these dogs, that start with them. Honestly, do you do that with your I guess out of like trainer curiosity, what are the ethics of that? Because like I've always wanted to send people breathing exercises, but then always been like, probably shouldn't give people human therapy recommendations when I have no qualifications. Yeah, what do you usually do? I'm just curious now, dog trainer to dog trainer.
I have struggled with that. I have gotten to the point in my relationship with a few clients where like I feel comfortable saying, like, look, we've done so much work with the dog. I think this issue might actually be yours. It's a very tricky thing to, like, when somebody, and I do in person, I also do virtual, but I do in person. So if someone hires me as a dog trainer and then I walk into their house, I can't just be like, actually, you're the one who needs therapy. But really, that's true.
Like $150, thank you, bye.
So it's really like, and I have run like a little online workshop just with like some clients, again, that I have that kind of pre-established rapport and relationship with, where it's like, and I did go to a yoga teacher training that doesn't make me a therapist, but I have some tools where it's like, yeah, let's do a breathing exercise, you know, but you can't perform therapy for people if you're just.
It's a challenging one though, because honestly, I sometimes they feel like it's such a gray area when I'm standing there with the chronically stressed type A guardian and I'm explaining nervous system regulation to them for dogs, and then explaining to them that you're going to have to do this with yourself as well if we're going to do it for your dog. It basically is therapy, and I feel so weird about it because often I get clients coming back to me being like, I didn't realize how much work I had to do. And I'm the same as you. Like I'm very funny about, I want to make sure that I'm doing a really, really good job. And often I'll mostly just try to point out patterns for folks. So like, what I can help people do is like identify their triggers. So like might identify that what one guardian in particular is really struggling and feeling very dysregulated when the dog is barking, for example, and that's something that they're really struggling with. It's a challenging one to like to balance, but sometimes I'll recommend the same earplugs that I use and be like, hey, maybe this will be helpful for you, or like just kind of point that gently push people in like the direction of like tools they could use to regulate themselves in the moment. My favorite one is just singing while you're walking your dog. Little things like that, like to help you regulate your nervous system. You can even just start there if you're unsure about all of this, like literally just start there. And I love the massage as well, because I think that's one of the most co-regulating activities that you can learn. So what type of massage do you do, out of curiosity? Sorry, I'm just like grilling you now about your techniques.
Oh yeah, well I am in the middle of an online canine massage program. I'm on like lesson 4. There's 12 lessons, so I'm like partway through. So a lot of the techniques are actually the same as human massage, and that is one thing that I teach people in the training sessions, is like how to properly pet your dog, which is not petting but massaging. And people are really confused because I'll critique the way that they're touching the dog and they're like, this isn't training. And I was like, yes it is.
I'm
like, can you
pissing them off like throughout the day in little ways and agitating them throughout the day in little ways, it's going to make a big difference. And that dysregulated cycle between the two of you is going to continue, and we really have to start there, honestly, because if you can't touch your dog to calm them down, what the hell are you going to do when they're all stressed out and you're out on the street? And these are basic things that you need. I totally agree.
That's one of the best tools. I always ask people, I say, is your touch stimulating to the dog or is it relaxing?
Yeah.
And so if I see the dog immediately tense up when their owner pets them, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're just stimulating the dog with the touch.
You want like a really floppy one, like you want like a melty little, like you want one that really shows that like softness in their body, and for their body to soften into you over the course of the session. I've done a few little courses but nothing significant. And then T-touch, I use a lot of T-touch because a lot of the dogs that I work with do have musculoskeletal issues and spinal issues, or kind of inadvertently becoming disabled dog specialists, just because so many of the cases we take have comorbidities in like medical areas. So sometimes massage even is too much, like we can't actually apply any pressure, and we're just moving the hair, moving the skin, really gentle touch, and offering clients a few like different techniques they can use that are very, very like low contact. I've even done like touch work without, they do it a lot on horses. I've done touch work with like spoons on dogs that are very like phobic of human hands but don't dislike being touched. They're just scared of the hands, and they do it with horses quite a lot, where they'll use like a target essentially, or cats. They do it with cats as well, because cats can often be, it's really interesting. I've been experimenting with this for a minute, and it's really helped me, especially with allowing dogs to observe things. Just observe while I'm here, I've got you, we're touching, we're in our bodies, we're thinking about where our bodies are, somatics, and then we can watch that stressful thing from a distance, or that thing that you're unsure about, and gather information without going in our heads and getting lost in that anxiety.
Yeah, I have a couple other things that I'm interested in. One is Mary DeBono's work with horses and dogs. She's actually a Feldenkrais practitioner. And so the way that she touches the dog is very light. It's super light. It kind of reminds me of, I did a workshop in stillness touch, which kind of helps the human. It wasn't even for dogs, it was for humans to use on other humans, but it helps you cultivate the correct, I don't want to say correct, but like it helps you cultivate your own embodiment and your own presence. That's really important. And then I have one other thing that my dogs really enjoy, and it's the tuning forks from Biofield Tuning.
Oh, I love that idea. I love hearing how you're like looking into these different areas, because it's actually, I've never thought much about that, but I've used things like scent oils and stuff like that as like somatic therapies, I guess, with dogs, to help them, encourage them to sniff. And I imagine the tuning forks will be some sort of focusing on a noise that, whatever, is it like, you give me a little overview just really quickly, because
it's actually, I could show it on the video, but then the audio people won't see it anyway, but so I'll just describe it. It's actually the one that I use with the dogs is a pretty heavy fork, and you actually put it on the body, but you use it very lightly,
so they feel the vibration.
So it's the vibration.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
that's really interesting, because I have one of those percussive massage devices. And one of my dogs always comes and sits next to me, just touching me, but not, they don't want it on them, they just want to feel the on them. So that little things like that, heated blankets, that's something I use a lot with my dogs. Sunbathing, literally, like things that get them in their body. Like they do it for me too. Like I'm the same. But I just love this like toolkit, I guess, of like different somatic tools that you can develop with your dog depending on what they need. I love the tuning forks idea. I have to think more about that.
I'll send you the link to Biofield Tuning. It's really interesting. And then I like what you said about, there's like this upward spiral when you start co-regulating, and then you get better, then the dog gets better. And like, just as an example, like I was pretty nervous getting on the Zoom, as I always am, because I'm like, one, I'm a little nervy anyway about like putting my face and my stuff out on the internet. But also because I was like, oh, are the dogs going to be quiet? Because I have 4 dogs in the house, and 3 of them are mine. One's a daycare dog, but I've worked really hard to make, I call it, let's make daycare boring again. Because
so boring.
everyone's like, what kind of activities do you do? And I'm like, we don't do too much.
Napping, hanging out, cuddling.
All 4 of the dogs are asleep right now, and it's like the middle of the day.
That's what we want to see. I love that. Probably the best day of the week for these dogs. Get a proper rest, get to hang out with their friends, be chill.
And I have a huge yard. If they want to zoom around the yard, they can. And if it's a dog who needs work, like we do work together, and we do some light training for enrichment and stuff like that. But I don't have 20 dogs here where they're all amping each other up all the time. You know what I mean? So I think that's really important. And Do you want to wrap up by just giving a few other examples of the fetch alternatives? Because I think we'll need a couple more ideas.
I agree. Yeah, I think we've got a few others in there. So I actually loved what you were saying about, we talked a little bit about the object that your dog might be associated with fetch games. So is it a ball? Is it a stuffy? Whatever it is. And I love what you said about, hey, if it's a ball, put that ball on a rope. Make it more likely for the dog to try other behaviors than just the fetching. And after having that conversation, I actually removed a bunch of loose balls that I had around my house because my dog kept going to them every single time to play. And I was like, no, get a tug, get something that's going to be better for us. So I like the idea that you had of just, what can we do to change the objects that we have in the environment or the objects that we're using with them to make it more likely for them to be play the way we want them to. So I loved putting it on a rope. I love using frisbees instead of balls that do the bouncy thing, and thinking about like getting really nice tuggy toys for your dogs. Honestly, that can be the first step, I think, to removing away from fetch, is setting yourself up for success and going, okay, I'm going to get a sheepskin tuggy with a bungee, and it's going to be really good. And then Pup's going to get so excited by it that we're both going to be really excited to play with it together, and it will help move us away from this habit that we've got into together. So setting up your environment for me was a big part, because you're breaking a habit with your dogs. So move the toys around, get new ones, put the balls away, put them on ropes, keep the toys in the car, and only use them outside if your dog is struggling to rest because they're playing repetitively, trying to play with you in the house or something like that in a way that's not helpful for them. So yeah, first thing I think is thinking about those toys and those tools that you're using. Definitely a nice option. And also thinking about where you're playing these games. So simply moving from a bouncy ball to a ball on a string, and moving from the basketball court to the tall grassy bit in your local park, having cover, uneven like surfaces, not just like tarmac or like just mowed lawn, where if you throw a toy, the dog has to use their nose to find it. Even these small adjustments, we're moving from this like quite barren, desolate, repetitive first half of the sequence to utilizing a lot more variety, a lot more sniffing, a lot more mindful movement, moving through the long grass, proprioception as the grass touches their body. These little things make a really, really big difference. So I think that's a big thing. Some big things that I'd say is like, what are we using, and where are we doing the play, and how can we ground them and yourself just by nature of setting yourself up for success? You use that a lot, like you use like long grass and cover is what they call it, isn't it? Covered ground.
Yeah, I'm actually really lucky where I am. I have a huge fenced yard with like privacy fencing, and there's trees and shade, and so yeah, I'm the same. Like, I like to slowly give people modifications, because sometimes it's too harsh to just say stop playing fetch. So like if we put the toy on a rope and like we still throw the toy, but when the dog comes back, we turn it into a little bit of tug.
Exactly.
And we just like slowly push the needle in the right direction. And also, I don't want people to feel like they always have to do this full arc of like, do you know what I mean? Like if I'm having a very busy day and I just don't have the time, or I don't have the emotional energy to take my dog through all of those sequences, like we just scatter feed.
Well, that's what we were saying the other day, is like, we were talking about how I don't know about you, but I'm disabled, meaning that in the sense that I have a chronic pain condition. So when someone says to me, okay, so you can't play fetch anymore, but you just have to spend 20 minutes wrestling with your muscly Staffordshire Bull Terrier, I'm like, okay, wait a second. So having options that of a bit of a variety, you know, where you're still playing that game, but you're just doing a little bit of tug at the end, or you're still playing that game, but you're just throwing it into grass or into water, so they have to swim to get it. But at the minimum, my like favorite like disabled babe activity is just laying down on my couch, watching TV, having their bowl of food, and just essentially playing fetch with that treat, those kibble, that treat, that whatever it is that you're eating, feeding your dog, just tossing one cookie after the other. The dog runs, they hunt it, they get it, they come back to you, you go, good job, have another one, and you throw that one too. Or like you're saying, just scattering a bunch of food across the yard. I do this for my Staffy all the time because he's the fastest eater in the world, and he will hurt himself if he doesn't slow down. So we scatter his food all around the yard. And actually the first thing he does when he comes out of his crate, which if you've met Staffies, it's kind of like a ball out of a cannon. He just propels out of his crate straight into the yard, spends 15 minutes sniffing his food, and after he's done, he's like, oh, hey guys, what's up? I had a great time. So even simple like that can be really, really helpful for the dog, just throwing those cookies around for them to find, or scent work, hiding the food around the house for them to then sniff out. That's another one that I really like. Or just using your toys but just hiding them instead of throwing them.
Yes.
That's my favorite one. Searching games or retrieving games are some of my favorite alternatives, especially if you have a retrieving dog or a dog that is more likely to want to search for things. And there is actually, I'm going to send you, in case you want to like put it in the show notes or whatever, a webinar by a friend of mine who has a webinar all about how you can teach your usually retrieving dog, so retriever games that can replace fetch, but they're especially for the retrieving side. So I hear that you're developing your fulfillment tools for the musclier dogs, the pushing, the resistance, and then we have often these like retrievery hunting dogs who maybe want something slightly different, so you can train them to find something, bring it back to you, sit perfectly in front of you, offer you that thing into your hand. What dog do you have, right? And figure out what would be best for you and what will be best for them. I'll send you the webinar that they have where they teach this. It's really cute. But I just love this general idea that we're coming to, which is like, what do you and your dogs need? Let's find the tools from these like wide range of somatic tools that we have. And then slowly, like you said, push the needle. I don't want people to like immediately stop playing fetch with their dogs. If they've played fetch for 5 years every day, that could be a big shift. So you're totally right in just like pressing that point. Like, we got to make sure it's a slow adjustment for everyone.
Yeah, definitely send me that link. And then let's go over like, where can people find you on Instagram, the website?
Yes, of course. So we actually spend the majority of our time on Instagram, in terms of like just communicating, chatting with people. We have lots of free content available there. So just Calm Canine Academy in Instagram and you'll find us there. And then the second place where you might be interested is our webinar library. So if you were to go to calmcanineacademy.com, you would find a free training section, and we have a ever-growing webinar library, which I think has like 15 to 20 longer form webinars, completely free, about topics that we specialize in, like reactivity, separation anxiety, especially working with city dogs, so that you can learn how we work. So yeah, we're all about giving out free content. We want this stuff to be accessible. We want it all to be free for all, and good stuff, not the nonsense that we see online these days. So yeah, check it out, and hopefully we'll see you around there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I'll post all those links, and whatever you want to send me for resources, I'll put in the show notes, and this will be on YouTube. We'll put it in the description of the video, and then yeah, people can find you, and of course they can take advantage of all the free stuff, but I would also encourage them, if this piqued their interest, to like book a consultation or however you do your process. And yeah, this was just awesome. I'm so glad that we connected.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to definitely be picking your brains for more of these fun tools that you're experimenting with. And I think it's awesome to like find someone who's doing very similar work, using very similar language. It's very cool. And there are not that many of us out there who are doing this. So I'm quite lovely to meet you. Excited to chat more in the future. Yes, I know, you can tell we're nearly done, for anyone. My little
Yeah,
shitsy.
and I would be open to doing another podcast if we come up with a different topic that we want to talk about, just because we do, I think, vibe so well on this.
I would love a muscly dog chat. I feel like we're wanting that. We're like, we kind of both want to chat about our muscly dogs, and I'm like, don't forget the retrievers, but also the muscly dogs.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That would be a fun topic for us to chat about, like outlets for muscly dogs, especially because it sounds like you also like to experiment with that. And I also experiment with things that people look at and go, like spring poles, and I have a stuffy that screams when he tugs. It looks intense, but it's interesting, this conversation around like, okay, so we used to think these things were bad and we used to think these things were good. How do we reimagine that and actually look at what the dog wants and what the dog needs, and not about like our social constructions around those different activities? So yeah, that could be fun.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And you have a wonderful evening.
Yes, I will.
And take care.
Thank you so much for having me on, my love.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.